Good day, grade 11 students. Welcome once again to Oral Communication in Context class, and this is our second video for week 1 of our subject. If you may still recall, we were able to discuss, tackle, and you were able to learn about the definition of communication and its nature during our first video lesson. For this second video lesson, you will be able to learn and we will discuss the processes that are involved in effective communication. On this slide, you can see here a basic representation or a figure of the communication process. Last video lesson, we said that communication is a process, meaning we follow a step-by-step procedure whenever we converse or talk with a person or a group of persons for that process to be valid and for our communication to be effective and easily understood by our listeners or receivers. In this figure, we can see that the communication process begins with a speaker. For example, you wanted to send a message to your classmates. You wanted to know how are they during this pandemic. So what you do is you send out a message. It can be an idea, an emotion, or an action. You want to convey and send that message to your classmate. The question is, how do you send it to him or to her? You may use email, Facebook Messenger, or you may call that person using your cell phone. When that person receives your message, he or she is then called the receiver or the listener. He will try to decode and he will understand and interpret your message, and the next step that he or she will do is to send a feedback. It's a response, a reply, a reaction, or a comment back to you, back to the speaker, to check whether the information has been properly understood and received, and so that the speaker may know if the receiver understood and can really participate in the communication process. The entire communication process happens within a context. And when we say context, it is the environment where the communication process takes place. And in this time of pandemic, in this new normal, the most common context that we are in is of course our own safe homes. We will now be discussing the components or parts of the communication process. The first part of the communication process is always the speaker. The speaker is also called the sender. And what is the role of the speaker or sender? He or she begins or initiates the conversation or the communication process. He is the source of the information or message. Now, what is the message? A message is any idea or ideas, emotions or thoughts that the speaker wants to convey to other people. It is something in the mind of the speaker that he or she wants to share to his or her listeners. This message will be encoded or converted into words or actions or symbols that will be easily transferred and will be easily understood by the listeners. The next component of the communication process is the channel. Once the message has been encoded by the speaker, it needs to be transferred to the listener. How? This is where the channel comes into play. The channel is the medium or means by which the message will be sent. Basically, it answers the question, how are we going to send the message? Common examples of channels are face-to-face conversation, use of a cell phone call, through Facebook Messenger, or sending out an email message. So what happens to the message? It will now reach the receiver. The receiver is also called the listener. He or she will receive and understand and interpret the message through the process that we call decoding. After receiving, understanding, and interpreting the message, the receiver will now send a feedback back to the sender or speaker. The feedback is a response. It's a comment or reaction of the receiver to the message. It is one way by which the sender or the speaker can check if the message has been properly received and understood by the receiver. It is one of the essential components of an effective communication process. Another important component of the process of communication is the context. The context is the environment where communication takes place, which is basically anywhere. But in this time of pandemic, in this new normal, the safest place and the most common place in which communication takes place is, of course, in the safety of our own homes. Now that you have learned the components of the process of communication, let's have a quick recap by giving a simple situation or a simple example. Florian, which in this case is the speaker, wants to check and know how her friend Edward is doing in this time of pandemic. So that is the idea and the message that Florian wants to send to Edward. What will she do next? She will now try to call Edward using her cell phone, and once the call has been accepted, the channel by which the conversation and the exchange of information will take place is, of course, the call using the cellular phone. For example, Florian will ask, "Edward, kumusta ka na? How are you?" And when Edward responds, "I'm okay. Okay naman ako." That response or reply is the feedback that will be received and sent back to the speaker. Once Florian receives the response of Edward, it means that the conversation is effective and that the message has been properly understood by the receiver. And now, the conversation can go on, which means the process of communication can also be considered a cycle. And the context in which the process takes place is, of course, at the safety of their own homes, of Florian and Edward. So that ends our second video lesson in our discussion for today. I hope you were able to understand and learn about the components of the process of communication. For our next lesson, for our video lesson 3, we will talk about the functions, the 5 different functions of communication. So that would be all, my dear grade 11 students. Once again, have a safe and a wonderful day ahead.